We're in Romans. Reverend Wallace, if you could pray for the Bible study, get us started. Amen. Amen. So, we are in Romans. What is the overall arcing method that we're teaching, the outline that we're teaching? 7 steps to the throne room. Man, we're already doing better. What step are we on right now? Still on sin. We're going to get to salvation today. Right, we're a little bit further. We're about 2/3, almost. We're almost done. We're going to start salvation today. But right now, we're still in sin, unfortunately. But what chapter are we in? Chapter 3. Awesome. All right, we're going to just go ahead. We're going to dive on in. And somebody go ahead and read verses 1 and 2 just to start us off. Okay, so he just asks a question as he begins to start in on this concept. He says, so what advantage is there to being a Jew? Okay, is there an advantage at all? Is there a better value or a certain thing that you are privileged in being a Jew? What advantage is there of the circumcision? What's the circumcision? We won't get into the details because they don't matter, but what it is it's just an outward show of righteousness. That's all it is, right? It's an outward show of righteousness. And he says, so what's the profit in it? What advantage does it have? Does it have no advantage at all? Well, it does have an advantage. What's the advantage? That unto the Jews was given the oracles of God, or the Word of God. So there is an advantage there, right? Just as if you were a child who was given the Word of God and taught it and educated in it as a young person. And so as you get older, you know the truth. Okay? Is there an advantage to that? Of course there's an advantage to that. We would be stupid to suggest that there's not an advantage to being taught the whole truth at a young age. So, yes, there is an advantage of being a Jew. That is the concept of what we call privilege. That's real privilege, is knowing the truth at an early age. Nothing else. There's nothing other form of privilege. That is the greatest form of privilege, to know the truth at an early age. And so he says to the Jews, yeah, there's a profit. You know the truth at an early age. And then he goes on. Somebody go ahead and read verses 3 and 4. Okay. So he asks a question here in verse 3, right? If a person doesn't believe, does it make what God's doing in their life negligent or have no effect? What he's saying is, if a person commits sin, does it make God a liar? If a person goes against the law, does it mean that God is not true? Well, obviously the answer is no. Just because you do not listen to the truth does not mean the truth doesn't have an incredible power. And in reality, it often has a greater power over people that do not do the truth when they know the truth. Because when you know the truth and you go against it, it requires a certain level of commitment to your sin. When you don't know what you're doing is wrong, it's easy to just float on down the road. But when you know it's wrong, it's the concept, right, of iniquity, which is known sin. But it goes deeper than just a word. It goes into, I'm going to do the thing anyway. What does that mean? It means you're going to get convicted that much more. When you know your thing you're doing is wrong and you do it anyway, you get the repercussions a lot more. And so that's what he's saying here. He says, no, God forbid. He says, let God be true and every man a liar. Just because a man doesn't believe it doesn't matter. And then he says, right here, and I want to ask you a question when he says, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings, and mightest overcome when thou art judged. Who is thou? Does anybody know? Now, I think you probably read it same way. You think it's talking about you. It's not. It's talking about God. He's quoting Psalms, talking to God, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings, and mightest overcome when thou art judged. When somebody tries to judge God, they don't overcome. God overcomes. He overcomes when somebody tries to judge him and when he commits a judgment. He says that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings. God is justified in his sayings, right? Let God be true and every man a liar, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings. Because what you're saying is true. It's talking to God. And then he continues on. Somebody read verse 5. Verse 5. I love how Paul, he makes sure, I'm not saying this. I speak as a man. But what is he saying here? He says, if our unrighteousness, what is our unrighteousness? Our falling short, our sin, our not being right, commends the rightness of God, the goodness of God, what God is, then is God unrighteous when he takes vengeance? Well, we already know that can't be true because God can't be unrighteous. He is righteous. But what is he saying? He's saying our shortcomings and our failures commend just how good God is. Right? That's the point of the law. We know this. The whole point of the Old Testament law is to prove that God is better and that we cannot attain unto his standards. What is commend? Okay, you'll read this here and in 2 Corinthians. These is a really good combination of concepts when it says to commend. The best way to describe it is if you've ever been around teenagers trying to get into a college, right? They need letters of recommendation. You could also say letters of commendation. They're being commended. Somebody is saying on their behalf, I can testify to their character, to their work ethic, to their intelligence, whatever. I can commend them. He talks about it in 2 Corinthians. As a bunch of preachers, he's saying, I don't need you to commend me. I don't need you guys to stand there. We do this all the time. Every time a church gets turned over from pastor to pastor, a pastor will get up there, and he'll bring the next pastor over, and he'll be like, this guy's great. He's commending him. He's talking about how awesome the next guy is. He's saying, well, I've known him, and then sometimes that guy shows up, and maybe he's not all that the last guy said he was. You never know, right? That guy maybe only knew him like we do at conference. I know the guy 2 weeks out of the year. He's a great guy for 2 weeks out of the year, right? But he's commending the person. He's saying this is their character. He's saying so our lack of character is in a way a letter commending how good God's character is. He says, so if that's what commends him, then is he unrighteous for taking vengeance on our lack, on our failure? He says, I speak as a man. Somebody go ahead and read verses 6 through 8. Verse 8. Okay, so there's this rumor floating around about the preachers, right? That because they're saying the law is, we don't need to uphold these trivial things about the law, that what we're saying is, well, when you sin, you make God's grace more evident. When you make your failures, you show this thing, which, like he says, whose damnation is just. There's nothing in the Bible to suggest we should commit sin just to prove that God's good. It's, again, stupid. But what is he saying here? If the truth of God hath more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged as a sinner? He's saying if God's truth, if what God can do in my life is evident through my failures, then why am I judged at all? That's the thing that proves it. But this is the problem. The commendation is not what makes the thing. The commendation is just saying that the thing is what it is. If you get commended for your actions, let's use a soldier who gets the Medal of Honor or the Medal of Valor, and they've put their life on the line. The letter of commendation or the Medal of Commendation is not the thing that made them do the thing. And it in no way really adds to their character. It is just a medal that says they did their thing. But it did not make them anything. It just acknowledges what they are, right? The Army has their Army Commendation Medals, and they are one of the higher things in the Army world is to have an ARCOM, not an AAM, an Army Achievement Medal, which says, hey, you did a good job, here's a high five. An ARCOM says, this guy did something, and we want to commend him for it. But it doesn't make him anything. It is just testifying to what he is. And every one of our shortcomings, when God is able to overcome them, we are not making God just, but we do testify to his goodness. We are just testifying. So therefore, it is perfectly okay for the righteous, perfect God to be able to judge us, because our lack isn't what makes him good. It just shows how good he is, but it doesn't make him good. And we have to think about it that way. So we need to come up to his standard. That's what he's saying here. And then he goes on, and somebody go ahead and read verses 9 through 11. Perfect. So, now we've already discussed this. Verse 10 here is the beginning of the concept of the Romans road, the thing to show a person the path to salvation, right? It starts here with, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. You could use the whole book of Romans to travel the Romans road of salvation. But we use this one verse. Why? Because if I'm talking to somebody that has no knowledge and is not a Jew, and I try to bring up the rest of Romans chapter 2 and 3 to them as this foundational element to get them saved, they are going to be thoroughly confused. Why? They don't know anything about circumcision. I'm not going to sit down with some guy off the street who's trying to get saved, be like, well, you know how circumcision works, right? Right? Let's just start here. There is none righteous, no, not one. But what he's saying here is none, Jew or Gentile, none righteous, not a one. And he says, we've already established this. They're all the same. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. What proves this more than anything is the Old Testament. A bunch of people given the law, given what to do, and if we read it, we really seem to find that the men before the law seem to be more righteous than the men after the law. When we read about Abraham, Abraham seems to take correction and make better judgments, and even has his children come, right? When we read about Jacob, and we read about Isaac, and we read about these men, they seem to correct behavior. When we read about Israel after the law, every time they get chastised, it seems like one guy goes, hey, be better, and everybody goes, challenge accepted. Let's be worse. I mean, I don't know how else to read it. Read Kings. They don't get better. They're given the law. They know what's true. No one seeks after God. Not a one. Especially the Jews. Especially the people given the law. The Old Testament proves it, and you know what else proves it thoroughly? History. Look at history. Look at the countries that have claimed to be Christian, all the way from the late Roman Empire, all the way through to today. Every one of these countries has some sort of testament to God in their constitution and claim to have this monarch that was established by the great God of the universe. And look at the things they did. How godly was that? I mean, history proves. Doesn't matter if you have the truth. No one seeks after God. Then none of them understand. Then it continues on. Somebody go ahead and read verses 12 and 13. Okay, he's saying not only are they just bad and they don't do good, also, basically all of verse 13 is talking about how evil their speaking is. They lie, they deceive, they go against God, they do everything in their power to go against the truth. What's the point? The point is, having the truth is only the beginning. Remember how it started. What advantage is there of being a Jew? Well, you have the truth. You have the oracles of God. They're given to you to take care of. But that is no guarantee whether or not you will be righteous. Doesn't matter if you have the truth in your hands. It matters whether or not you use the truth. There is many a version of Bible that can get a person saved. Not just the King James Version, contrary to popular belief. The King James Version is the best for correcting and building upon your life and building upon your faith because it is the most correct. But God can use the devil to get somebody saved. And how many Bibles are sitting on people's coffee tables and they are not living a godly life? Why? They have the truth. It's sitting right there. If they were to just read it, they might get something out of it. But just because you have it in your possession doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. And he continues on. Somebody read verses 14 through 18. They have all the sin. And what really it boils down to, above all else, is the final verse. There is no fear of God before their eyes. They have no fear. And what do we know that the fear of God is? It is the beginning of wisdom. Beginning of wisdom. And if you don't have fear of God, you can't get wisdom. It needs to start right there. I need to at least be scared. If I'm not even scared, I cannot gain anything else from God. It's the beginning of wisdom. They have no fear before their eyes. No fear of God before their eyes. Then he continues on. Verse 19 and 20. Somebody go ahead and read it. Perfect. He says, what does the law do? Well, it shows us our sin. It gives us the knowledge of sin, right? And because of that, every mouth should be stopped. When you're sitting there defending yourself, basically what Paul is saying is, it makes you go, shut up. You're wrong. I can't defend myself. Why? Because the standard is not men. The standard is God. If we're comparing ourselves to men, I can always find a worse man. I mean, it's easy. But when you're comparing yourself to God, it doesn't leave much room for error. Right? If you're sitting there lifting weights and you're checking your form and you're just looking for somebody else with a worse form, well, somebody out there's probably got a worse form. That doesn't mean you're not going to hurt yourself. It just means that that guy's got a worse form and might hurt himself earlier. But it's no guarantee of your own protection. And in the same way, when you're comparing yourself to God, you just kind of shut up. Every mouth must be stopped. All the world may become guilty before God, because by the law is the knowledge of sin. Then he continues on in verse 21. Somebody go ahead and read it. Actually, 21 through 23. Awesome. Does anybody know what just happened? We just moved over to salvation. That's exactly what just happened. Why? What happened? Well, he says, now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested. Now we're not looking at the unrighteousness. We've established pretty much every form of sin. We've talked about it from actions to spiritual perspectives to the way you think about things to the way you act. We've gone over all that. But now the righteousness of God is made manifest. Doing what? Now we established that the righteousness did not come by the law, but it is witnessed by the law and the prophets. What is the law? This is where things get a little bit complicated sometimes. Because when we say law, we mean so many different things. Sometimes we mean Leviticus, sometimes we mean Exodus and Deuteronomy and Numbers, and then sometimes we just mean Genesis through Numbers. Right? And that is the law. Why? Because it's everything Moses wrote. Then there's the other side, which is the prophets. What are the prophets? Well, when you're looking at the Old Testament, it ends up being everything after that. Kind of how it boils down to. Why? Because pretty much every book after that is written by a prophet. Whether or not they were a prophet in the classical sense of standing there saying the end of the world is coming, or if they are prophesying by dictating out the word of God. That's why Moses is a prophet. That's why all of these men are prophets. And so when he says it is witnessed by the law and the prophets, it's because they said this would come. Everybody from Moses saying, one like unto Moses shall come, all the way up through the prophets and Ezekiel and Zechariah and Isaiah and all these guys having a grand old time writing about stuff that they didn't know. But what they wrote witnessed of the truth that would come later. So all of the righteousness is witnessed by them. And he says, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ, unto all and upon all that believe, for there is no difference. Why? All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Everybody, whether they had the law to know they were coming short, or they didn't have the law, but they still came short, right? It doesn't matter whether or not you saw the speed limit sign. If you're speeding, you're getting the ticket. You can't say, well, I didn't see the speed limit sign. Why? Because everyone says they didn't see the speed limit sign. If that's probably used more than the dog ate my homework. I mean, every person says I didn't see the speed limit sign. Doesn't matter if you saw the truth. If you broke the law, you broke the law. Everybody has come short of the glory of God. So for some, it's more embarrassing than others, truthfully, because you knew it and you fell short. But even if you didn't know, you still fell short. Everybody's equal. There's no difference. But the righteousness of God is by faith in Jesus Christ upon all that believe. Every single one that believe. Then it continues on. Verse 24. Somebody go ahead and read verse 24. There you go. We're justified freely. Why are we justified freely? Because we didn't buy the grace. So it's free. We had no part in that process. It came freely. Freely justified. Justified freely by His grace, His unmerited favor towards us, through the redemption, the being bought back by Jesus. Right? Nothing can ever redeem itself. A coupon never self-applies itself at the checkout. You have to redeem it. You have to present it. It cannot redeem itself. And so, no man can redeem themselves. They must be redeemed by Jesus. This is exactly what he's saying here. Everybody is redeemed by Jesus Christ. And then comes verse 25, which is a vocab verse. So I'm going to read it for you. First it says, whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in His blood, to declare His righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. What does this mean? Talking about Jesus, who God has set forth to be a redeeming sacrifice. That's what propitiation means. A redeeming sacrifice through, now what's faith? Unwavering trust in His blood, to declare His righteousness, Jesus' righteousness, for the remission or freedom from sins that are past. Well, that's important to remember. Through the forbearance or the self-control of God. That's what forbearance means. Self-control. God's self-control allows all of this to come. It's important to remember the remissions are for sins that are past, not for sins that are future, but for sins that are past. So God does all of this, and then for what reason? Somebody read verse 26. Okay, now again, there's a lot of hymns and his. So, to declare at this time Jesus' righteousness, that Jesus might be just and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. He is just. The Father, this is all talking about the Father from 24 all the way through. It's all talking about the Father establishing that Jesus is righteous so that he can make people just. That is the significance here. It's to change people, to declare that other people can be made just. Other people can be made righteous. Now we're done with the sin. The righteousness never came by the law, never came by the thing that we've just established over the last 3 chapters, because the righteousness only came by Jesus. Jesus, the one that was able to do it. And then verse 27, somebody go ahead and read it. Right? So where is the boasting? Where are you going to brag? O Jews? Well, remember, now you've probably forgotten, because this was several weeks ago now. There were 2 groups that were both arrogant. The Jews and the Gentiles. Both were arrogant. The Jews were arrogant because they came from the lineage of Abraham. The Gentiles were arrogant because they didn't need the lineage of Abraham to get saved. Both of them got arrogant. Both of them were cocky. And so now they're butting heads because they both think they're special. Because the one thinks they're special because of blood, the other thinks they're special because they're not part of the blood. Right? They both are arrogant. And he's saying here, so where's your boasting? It's by the law of faith that you got saved. How are you going to boast? You had nothing to do with your own salvation other than you just believed. Kudos to you. That's the easy part. You didn't die on the cross. You didn't do anything. Where is the boasting then? Where are you guys getting this arrogance from? And then he continues on. Somebody read verse 28. He's justified by faith and not by the deeds of the law. Why is he not justified by the deeds of the law? Because he could not fulfill the law. He probably broke it when he was 2. The first time they said, "No, I didn't, Mom." The first time, boom, you broke the law. Now you're done. You might as well gone and killed somebody. You broke the law. You're done. But you're justified by faith right here, not by the deeds of the law. Sin, it comes. Somebody read 29 and 30. Perfect. Is he just the God of the Jews? No. Is he the God of Gentiles also? Yes. And why? How does this apply to everybody? He will justify both of them by faith. Both of them. The Gentiles aren't special because they got justified by faith. The Jews aren't special because they get justified by the law. They're both getting justified by faith. They both have the same method of justification. So there is no boasting on either side. When you both have to do the same thing, then how are you possibly boasting? You both have to do exactly the same requirements. So there's no room for arrogance. There's no room for boasting. It's kind of funny when you meet people like this all the time outside of the godly world, where 2 guys will have the same position and one will be arrogant. You're like, how are you cocky in front of him? You both have the same job. You're both the same thing. But he'll think he's special because of some random made-up thing in his brain that makes him special. And so did the Jews and the Gentiles. Both of them did the same thing. You both got saved for the same reason. And yet you're going to feel arrogant because you're the same thing. So stop feeling special. Stop feeling like you are better than them. And then he finishes off, verse 31. Somebody go ahead and read it. All right, now this is where it gets tricky. This is where it gets tricky because people say, okay, we've done away with the law. Did we destroy the law? Have we overcome the law? Have we done all this? He says, no, we established the law. Let me ask you the question. Everybody here, we got our rogue Bible scholars. What is the purpose of the law? Boom, that's the word, right? It's a schoolmaster. It's to teach people that they're wrong. What did the law end up doing? It proved to them that they could not be made right. Proved to them that they could not keep the law. Then the Christian comes and he's made just, which means two things. One, his past sins are remitted. He's made free from them. He moves forward. Number two, he now stops sinning. By not sinning, he now proves the law. Because the law said you couldn't be righteous in your own power. And then man said, see, we can't be righteous. And then God said, look at him now. When you have a person that is not sinning, they put that much more weight on the person that is sinning. They prove the law. They don't do away with the law by abiding by God's law and by keeping the New Testament covenant where God has made me righteous and he's now made me clean and I'm not sinning. Then I become a greater testament than the law even was, because all the law said was, see, you guys can't keep the law. But what the Christian says is, see, I keep the law. Meaning your lack of keeping the law is not justified just because you're human. It simply means you now need to get justified. You need to be made righteous. And that is salvation. Salvation is not a prayer that means you're good to go for the rest of your life. Salvation means that you now become something new. And you now become the walking law that brings that much more condemnation upon all people. You guys remember in Romans chapter 1 when he says when they do the things that are in the law without the law, they become the law. The Gentiles, when they start doing the law outside of the law, they become the law. And so when the salvation hits a person and they start walking righteous, they do not excuse the law. They make the law kind of, in a way, laughable because the law had no power. But now that you are walking righteous, you are more of a testament against the unrighteous, specifically against even the Jews. This is why now, a lot of times, New Testament Christians kind of find the Jews to be a joke. Why? You guys are given the law, and you guys are still the worst. And yet I wasn't given the law by inheritance. I wasn't called to be the children of God, and to be God's chosen nation. And yet I am keeping the righteousness that you couldn't keep. Meaning, it's time to get saved, Jews. It's time to get saved. Anybody that's trying to excuse them, right? No one's perfect. Well, why does the Bible say, be ye perfect? It's a command. Why? Because Jesus is perfect. And we're supposed to be like Jesus. We prove the law. We become the new law by being righteous. Like I said, now we're done with sin. We're moving forward. Does that mean that it's going to get easier? No. You guys are already saved. It means it only gets harder. This is Romans. Romans is no joke. Romans only makes you feel worse about yourself. Facts. If you read it appropriately instead of reading it like a fun poem that mom and dad taught you when you were a kid. You actually read what it says. God bless you. We're going to have a good time this week. Church Thursday. Then we're going to have a fun, I got all the boys coming over. We're going to redo the pulpit on Friday. And then we got our long weekend. We're going to have a good time. So God bless you. Go with God. God will go with you. Reverend Hooker, if you could dismiss us in prayer.